The ledger Maud Sinclair had spent 9 months restoring was open on the auction house desk, and the man standing over it was tearing out the pages. Not roughly. That was the worst part. Mr. Gresham removed each leaf with the precise, unhurried care of someone who had already decided the work was worthless and wanted her to watch it become so. The sound of good paper separating from its binding reached her before she could cross the room, a soft, fibrous whisper, like skin peeling from a wound. "These records are incomplete," Gresham said, holding a page to the gaslight, as though checking for watermarks. "Dates fabricated. Provenance invented. I cannot present falsified documents to the board, Miss Sinclair. You understand." Maud's hands were steady. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger, a habit from years of bookbinding, testing the sharpness of a folding bone against skin, and felt the crescent of pressure ground her. "Those dates match the parish records of Thornfield, Mr. Gresham," she said. "I cross-referenced every entry against the original sale catalogs held at Christie's. If you tear out page 47, you will lose the only surviving proof that the Harcourt silver was legitimate and not stolen during the railway riots." He tore out page 47. 3 of the junior clerks watched from the far end of the counting room. Not one of them moved. Gresham folded the page into quarters and slipped it into his coat pocket. And the gesture was so deliberate that Maud understood it instantly. This was not about accuracy. This was about ownership. "You were engaged here as a temporary cataloger," he said. "Your father's debts settled your family's claim to competence long before you arrived. I've taken the liberty of informing the partners that your position is no longer required." The room smelled of ink and tallow, and the particular staleness of men who had been sitting in the same chairs since morning. Maud felt the dismissal land the way a stone lands in a pond. The impact first, the ripples after. "My father's debts are not my provenance, Mr. Gresham," she said, "and neither is your forgery." His hand, reaching for another page, went still. "I beg your pardon?" "You have been altering the Pemberton estate inventory for 3 months. I have noticed. I expect the partners have not, because you are very good at it." She pressed her thumbnail harder into her finger. "But you are not as good as you think. The ink you used on the Gainsborough attribution does not match the iron gall formula from before 1852. It is a Prussian blue compound. It did not exist when that painting was supposedly authenticated." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man recalculating how dangerous she was. Gresham's face did not change. He had the kind of face that never changed, smooth and reasonable and utterly convinced of its own authority, but his hand withdrew from the ledger. "You are dismissed, Miss Sinclair," he said. "Effective immediately. I will have your final wages sent to your lodgings." "You will not," she said, "because you do not know where I lodge." She gathered her coat from the hook by the door. The wool was damp from the morning's rain, and the weight of it against her shoulders felt like the only solid thing in the room. She did not look at the clerks. She did not look at the torn pages scattered across the desk like fallen leaves. She walked out into the November evening, and the cold hit her throat like a swallow of water. The first strange thing happened 3 hours later. Maud was sitting in the narrow room she rented above a milliner's shop on Bruton Street, copying out the dates she had memorized from the Pemberton ledger onto fresh paper. Her own paper, bought with her own money. When the heat began, it started in her hands, a flush that spread upward through her wrists, into her forearms, as though she had plunged them into hot water. She set the pen down and pressed her palms flat against the cool surface of the writing desk, but the wood warmed beneath her skin almost instantly. Then the smell. She could suddenly smell the tallow from the candle with unbearable clarity. Not just wax and wick, but the rendered fat of the animal it had been. the age of the twist of cotton, the faint mineral trace of the tin holder. Beyond that, the lavender sachets in the milliner's shop below, the damp wool of coats hung to dry in the hallway, the bread someone was baking 3 houses down. Maud pressed her thumbnail into her index finger, counted the sensations, categorized them. She was a cataloger. She sorted things. This was a fever. She had walked in the rain. She was overtired. She had not eaten since the morning's bread and cheese. But fevers did not make you hear the heartbeat of the mouse behind the wainscoting. She stood, and her legs felt wrong, stronger than they should, restless as though her muscles were pulling her toward movement she had not chosen. The room was too small. The walls pressed in. The air tasted of dust and old fabric. And something underneath that she had no word for. Something green and alive and entirely wrong for London in November. She opened the window. The cold air hit her skin and evaporated like water on a hot pan. She was burning, not with pain, with a vitality she did not recognize, a humming urgency that had no object and no name. "This is a fever," she said aloud, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, deeper, rougher, as though something had settled in her throat. She soaked a cloth in the basin water and pressed it to the back of her neck. The relief lasted 4 seconds. She counted. The knock on her door came at 10:30. Maud Sinclair. I know you're in there because I can see your candle, and because you never go anywhere that isn't a library or a sale room." The voice belonged to Charlotte Fielding, and despite the heat crawling through her body, Maud nearly smiled. She had not heard Charlotte's voice in over a year, not since the scandal of her father's bankruptcy had made the Sinclair name something to be avoided at dinner parties. She opened the door a crack. Charlotte stood in the hallway with her coat unbuttoned and a paper bag that smelled violently of hot chestnuts. "You look terrible," Charlotte said, pushing past her into the room. "Good Lord, it is an oven in here. Have you set fire to something?" "I have a fever," Maud said. Charlotte pressed the back of her hand to Maud's forehead and pulled it away as though burned. "That is not a fever. That it is a furnace. Sit down. Eat a chestnut. I came because I heard what that weasel Gresham did. Thomas Reed told his wife, who told my cousin, who told me at supper, and I left before the pudding course, which tells you how alarmed I was because it was a treacle tart." Maud sat. The chair felt too confining. She wanted to stand, to pace, to run. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger and said, "How did you find my lodgings?" "I asked at 6 shops. You are not as invisible as you think, Maud. You are merely stubborn." Charlotte set the chestnuts on the desk and looked at her with an expression that was affectionate and slightly exasperated, the particular expression of a woman who had been friends with someone since they were both 23 and had not stopped merely because society expected her to. "Now, tell me everything about Gresham, and then we are going to discuss why you are burning like a coal grate in November." Maud told her about the ledger, the torn pages, the ink discrepancy, the dismissal. She did not tell her about the smell of the candle, or the mouse's heartbeat, or the way her skin felt like it belonged to someone else. Charlotte listened with the focused attention of a woman who had always been better at society than Maud, but had never once used that advantage against her. "He is forging provenance documents," Charlotte said, "to inflate the value of the Pemberton estate sale. That is fraud, Maud. That is prison. Which is why he dismissed me before I could tell anyone. Do you have proof?" "I have my notes. I have the dates I memorized. I have the ink analysis, though I would need access to the original documents to demonstrate it to anyone who matters." Charlotte ate a chestnut. and looked at her steadily. "Then we need to get you access, and I know exactly who can provide it. Charlotte, Lord Ashworth. He is the principal buyer for the Pemberton collection. He has been at every viewing. He has more authority in that auction house than Gresham could dream of. And," Charlotte added, with a precision that Maud recognized as dangerous, "he asked about you." The heat flared. Maud gripped the edge of the desk and felt the wood creak under her fingers, which was impossible because she was not strong enough to make oak creak. She released it immediately. "Asked about me," she repeated. "At the viewing last Thursday. He wanted to know who had restored the Pemberton ledger. Thomas Reed told him your name, and he said, and I am quoting Thomas's wife quoting Thomas, 'The work is exceptional. I should like to meet her.'" Maud's skin pulsed with heat. She pressed the damp cloth to her wrists and breathed through her mouth. "I cannot meet anyone in this state. You cannot stay in this room in this state either. You need a physician." "I need sleep." Charlotte studied her for a long moment, then stood. "I'm coming back tomorrow morning. If you are still this hot, I'm fetching Dr. Hargrove whether you like it or not. And if you are better, we are going to see Lord Ashworth." She left the chestnuts. She left the door slightly ajar, and the cold air from the hallway crept in like a mercy. Maud closed it, locked it, and sat on the floor because the floor was the coolest surface in the room. The heat was getting worse. Her nightdress clung to her skin. She could smell the starch in the fabric, the lye in the soap she had washed it with, the cedar of the wardrobe where it had hung. Beyond the walls, she could hear the milliner locking up downstairs, the click of each latch precise and separate. She could hear footsteps on the street. How many she could not count, but she could smell them. Wool and tobacco and horse and mud, and beneath all of it, the particular chemical signature of each separate person. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger until the pain was the loudest thing she could feel, and she recited the Pemberton catalog entries in order. Item 1, a silver salver, hallmarked London 1743. Item 2, a pair of candlesticks, Sheffield plate, circa 1790. Item 3. She did not remember falling asleep. Lord Marcus Ashworth stood in the doorway of his study at 3:30 in the morning, and could not understand why the house smelled of jasmine and smoke. Not the jasmine of the gardens. Those had been cut back weeks ago. This was warmer, living, threaded with something that bypassed his mind entirely and spoke to the thing beneath his ribs that was not entirely a man. His wolf lifted its head inside him the way a hound lifts its head at a distant horn. He had been working late. He was always working late. The Pemberton acquisition was complicated by the sheer volume of disputed items, and someone, he did not yet know who, had been tampering with the provenance records. His solicitor's letters were spread across his desk like a paper battlefield. He had been reading them with the focused patience of a man who had been alpha of the London pack for 11 years and had learned that most problems yielded to sustained attention. But this smell, it was not coming from inside the house. It was coming from the northeast, carried on the November wind through the window he had left cracked for the cold air that helped him think. His wolf pressed forward, not urgently, not with alarm, but with a certainty so absolute that Marcus felt his vision shift. The edges of the room went gold for a moment before he blinked it back. He gripped the edge of his desk. The wood groaned. He released it, flexed his fingers, and stood very still in the way his household knew meant he was holding something inside himself on a short leash. Then he walked to the window and breathed in, and the wolf said one word that was not a word, but a recognition older than language. Her. Marcus closed the window, opened it again. The scent was stronger. Jasmine and smoke, and underneath it something that made every nerve in his body orient northeast, like a compass needle finding true north. He knew what this was. He had been alpha long enough to recognize the heat scent of a shifter in their first change. The body's announcement of what it was becoming, broadcast through the skin in waves of pheromone so potent that even a human standing close enough might feel unsettled without knowing why. But this scent was not a pack member's. He knew every wolf in London. He had catalogued their scents the way a careful man catalogues his accounts. This was someone new, someone alone. Someone who, from the raw, confused edges of the scent, did not know what was happening to her. His wolf pulled, hard. Marcus braced his hands on the windowsill and did not move. He moved. The streets of Mayfair at 3:30 were empty and cold and smelled of horse dung and coal smoke. Through all of it, the jasmine and smoke thread wound like a lit fuse. He followed it north along Bruton Street, his stride longer than it should have been. His coat unbuttoned because the cold did not reach him the way it reached other men. His skin was too warm. It was always too warm. But tonight it burned. The scent led him to a milliner's shop with a room above it. A candle burned in the upper window, though the flame was guttering. He could hear a heartbeat on the other side of the wall. Fast, irregular, distressed. He could smell salt and fever, and the bright green panic of someone who did not understand their own body. He stood on the pavement and looked up at the window, and felt his wolf press against his skin like a great warm weight, trying to pour through a space too small. He did not go in. He climbed the stairs to the upper hallway and sat down outside her door, his back against the wall, his legs stretched across the narrow corridor. He listened to her breathe. After a while, her breathing changed, sharper, more awake. "Drink water," he said through the door. His voice came out lower than he intended, the wolf pressing into his vocal cords. He cleared his throat. "If you have a basin, drink from it. Open a window on the north side if you have one. The cold air will help." Silence. Then a rustle of fabric, footsteps, unsteady but purposeful. The sound of a window being unlatched. A gasp as the cold air hit skin that was too hot. "Who are you?" Her voice was rough with exhaustion, but underneath the roughness was the sharp, categorizing tone of someone who sorted information for a living. Even now. Even like this. "Lord Ashworth," he said. "I am a buyer for the Pemberton collection. A friend of yours, Miss Fielding, spoke of you this evening at a supper I attended." A pause. "Charlotte told you where I live." "Charlotte told me you had been dismissed unjustly. The address I determined on my own." This was true in the way that mattered. Charlotte had mentioned Bruton Street, and the rest had been his wolf's doing. He was not going to explain that part through a door at 4 a.m. "I am unwell," she said. "I cannot receive visitors." "I am not visiting. I am sitting in a hallway. I will remain here until dawn, and then I will leave. You will not see me." Another pause, longer this time. He could smell her thinking. The particular shift in her scent when confusion resolved into cautious assessment. He could smell the moment she decided he was not a threat. It smelled like cloves in winter air. "Why?" she asked. He considered the true answer, which was, "Because my wolf will not allow me to be anywhere else on earth right now." He said instead, "Because I have been looking for the person who catalogued the Pemberton ledger, and I would prefer she survived the night." A sound that might have been a laugh. "I had the same preference." He sat there until the gray light of dawn crept through the hallway window. On the other side of the door, she breathed. Sometimes she paced. Once he heard her whisper numbers to herself. Catalog entries, he realized, recited in order like a rosary. Item 1, a silver salver. Item 2, a pair of candlesticks. She was steadying herself with the work she knew how to do. His wolf settled inside him like an enormous dog, curling beside a fire. The warmth of it was so complete that Marcus leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. At dawn, the scent shifted. The urgency faded. The jasmine softened to something quieter. Still there, still hers, but no longer a signal, more like a signature. The door opened. She stood in the frame looking down at him. She was 30, perhaps. Dark hair pulled back in a plait that had come half undone. Eyes the color of strong tea. She was pale from the night, and her nightdress was damp at the collar. She held herself with the particular composure of a woman who had just endured something she could not explain and intended to file it away until she could. She looked at him on the floor. He looked up at her. The power of the moment was in the inversion. The most powerful wolf in England, sitting on a dirty hallway floor, looking up at a woman who did not know what she was, and the woman standing above him with her chin set, and her eyes sharp, and her hand gripping the doorframe because her legs were not entirely steady. "You stayed," she said. "I did." "You did not try the door?" "No." She studied him for a long moment. His eyes, he knew, were safe. He had held them brown all night through an effort of will that had left him with a headache. His hands were in his lap. He had made himself as small as a man of his size could make himself. "Thank you," she said. "Then, I would like to discuss the Pemberton forgeries at your earliest convenience." He nearly laughed. His wolf, settling deeper, hummed a sound like approval. "Shall we say 10 o'clock?" 10 o'clock, she said, and closed the door. Charlotte arrived at 9 with a clean dress and an expression that suggested she had not slept either. "You look marginally less like a furnace," she said, pressing her hand to Maud's forehead. "What happened?" "The fever broke at dawn." "And the gentleman sitting in the hallway when I arrived?" Maud paused, the buttons of the borrowed dress half done. "He was here. He was leaving. Tall, dark coat. Built like he could carry a horse. He nodded at me as though we were old friends and walked down the stairs without a word." Charlotte picked up the cold chestnuts from the night before and dropped them into the waste bin. "That was Lord Ashworth, Maud. I know his face. Why was the most influential art collector in London sitting outside your door at 6 in the morning?" "He came about the Pemberton ledger." "At 6 in the morning. He keeps unusual hours." Charlotte looked at her with the expression of someone who had known Maud Sinclair since they were both sorting their father's libraries and could recognize deflection at 40 paces, but she did not press. She helped Maud dress, braided her hair into something presentable, and walked with her to Ashworth's townhouse on Grosvenor Square. The house smelled of beeswax and pine. Maud noticed this at the threshold. The pine, specifically, which was not from furniture polish but from something deeper, something that permeated the walls as though the building itself had grown around a forest. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger and catalogued the sensation without interpreting it. Ashworth met them in his study. In daylight, sitting behind his desk, he was exactly as Charlotte had described, commanding, quiet, with features that suggested patience over aggression. His hands were folded on the desk and his eyes were brown. And when Maud entered the room, he went completely still for one breath before resuming motion. She noticed. She filed it. "Miss Sinclair," he said. "Please sit. Tell me about Mr. Gresham." She told him. She laid out the dates, the ink discrepancies, the pattern of alterations, each entry in the Pemberton ledger that Gresham had changed to inflate the provenance of items he intended to sell through a private channel. She spoke for 12 minutes without interruption, and when she finished, Ashworth looked at her the way certain people look at an exceptionally well-made thing. Not with desire, but with recognition. "You memorized the entire ledger," he said. "I restored it page by page. The information accumulated." "How many altered entries?" 43. "I can list them." She listed them. Charlotte, sitting in the corner, ate a biscuit from the tray that had appeared without anyone seeming to ring for it, and watched them both with an expression of increasing interest. "I need the original documents to demonstrate the ink discrepancy," Maud said. "Gresham dismissed me to prevent exactly that. If I could gain access to the auction house files—" "I can provide access," Ashworth said. "I can do more than that. I can hire you directly as my provenance consultant for the Pemberton acquisition. Your work would be independent of the auction house, and Gresham would have no authority to interfere." The offer waited between them like a held breath. Maud felt the heat, not the fever of the night before, but a quieter warmth, a flush that started in her chest and moved outward. His eyes were on hers, and there was something in them that she had never seen before. Not pity, not calculation, something patient and certain, like a man who had found something he had been looking for and was trying very hard not to hold it too tightly. "I accept," she said. Charlotte coughed. "I am going to observe," she said, "that this is the fastest employment negotiation in the history of London, and that neither of you has discussed salary." Ashworth's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "Name your terms, Miss Sinclair." Maud named them. They were precise, professional, and slightly higher than what she had earned at the auction house. He agreed without negotiation, and something shifted in the room, a settling, like a house accepting weight. She noticed that his hand, resting on the desk, was radiating heat she could feel from across the surface. Over the following week, Maud worked in Ashworth's library with access to the Pemberton documents he had purchased directly. She cross-referenced every entry against parish records, sale catalogs, and estate inventories. The pattern of Gresham's forgeries became clearer with each day. 43 altered entries, yes, but also 6 entirely fabricated items that had never existed in the Pemberton collection. Gresham was creating phantom art to sell. She worked best in the late afternoon, when the light through the library windows was gold, and the house settled into its evening quiet. Ashworth joined her on the third day, reading correspondence at the opposite end of the table. She discovered 3 things about him that she filed in the meticulous archive of her mind. First, he never asked her to explain her methods. He watched her work with the quiet attention of someone who understood that competence did not require commentary. Second, the room was always warm when he was in it, not the warmth of a well-stoked fire. She had checked the grate, and it was often barely lit, but a warmth that seemed to emanate from him, from the air around him, as though his body generated heat in excess of what a man should. Third, he knew when she was frustrated before she showed it. She would be working through a particularly tangled entry, her jaw tight, her pen still. Without looking up from his own papers, he would say, "The Christie's catalog from 1847 is on the second shelf, 3rd volume from the left." And it was always the right reference. "How do you do that?" she asked on the 5th day, after he had identified the exact record she needed before she had spoken. His pen stopped. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker, a shift in the brown that was there and gone before she could identify it. You tap your pen twice when you are looking for a date, he said, and 3 times when you are looking for a name. The Pemberton dates correlate to Christie's. It was a reasonable assumption. It was a reasonable answer. It was also not quite true, and she knew it the way she knew a forged signature. Not from any single flaw, but from the overall feel of a thing that was almost right but not entirely. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger and returned to work. That evening, a letter arrived at the house addressed to Maud. Gresham's handwriting, precise and even. Charlotte, who had taken to visiting daily, read it over Maud's shoulder. "He is claiming you stole documents from the auction house," Charlotte said flatly. "He is threatening to report you to the Metropolitan Police." Maud set the letter down. The paper smelled of Gresham's pomade and of the particular ink he used, the Prussian blue compound that had betrayed his forgeries. I took nothing. Everything I have is from my own memory and from records Lord Ashworth obtained independently. "He does not need you to have actually stolen anything," Charlotte said. "He needs the accusation to be credible enough to discredit you before you can discredit him." Ashworth appeared in the library doorway. He had not been summoned and should not have known about the letter. And yet, here he was, his eyes slightly darker than they had been at breakfast, his body angled toward Maud in the way she had begun to notice. Always between her and the nearest exit, as though positioning himself without conscious thought. "What has he done?" he asked. Maud showed him the letter. She watched his face as he read it. The stillness that came over him was not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of something very large, holding itself very carefully in check. His mouth became a white line. His eyes, she saw it this time, clearly in the lamplight, shifted from brown to amber for the space of a heartbeat before returning. She did not look away. "I will have my solicitor respond," he said, his voice controlled in the way a dam is controlled. "No," Maud said, "not yet. If you respond through a solicitor, Gresham knows he has frightened me. I want him to think I have nothing. I want him to believe I am powerless and alone, and that his letter achieved its purpose." Charlotte said, "She is right, and I am irritated about it." Ashworth set the letter down. His hand brushed Maud's as he did, and the heat of his skin was startling. Not unpleasant, not feverish, but alive in a way that human skin should not be. She felt it in her fingertips for minutes afterward. "What do you need?" he asked. "Time," she said, "and access to the partners of the auction house. Specifically, Mr. Hale and Mr. Compton. They are honest men who have been kept ignorant of what Gresham has done." "I know Hale," Charlotte said. "His wife is in my garden society. I can arrange an introduction." "Do it," Maud said. Ashworth watched her the way she had come to recognize, with that patient, certain attention that saw more than she showed. She was not afraid of the letter. She was afraid of the heat in her hands, which had returned in the quiet of the evening like a tide coming back in, of the fact that she could smell the pine scent of his coat from across the table with a clarity that no fever could explain. The second attack came 9 days later, and it was not a letter. Gresham appeared at a viewing of the Pemberton collection, an event Ashworth had hosted at his own townhouse for prospective buyers. He arrived uninvited, impeccably dressed, and carrying a folder that he presented to the assembled buyers with the smooth authority of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "I regret to inform the company," he said, "that several items in this collection have been authenticated using forged documents prepared by a Miss Maud Sinclair, formerly of our establishment, who was dismissed for professional misconduct." The room went quiet. 12 buyers, 3 dealers, and a representative from the British Museum looked at Maud, who was standing beside the display cases with her own folder of authenticated records. "Mr. Gresham," Maud said, and her voice was steady because her thumbnail was pressed into her finger hard enough to leave a mark. You are standing in Lord Ashworth's house accusing his provenance consultant of fraud. I wonder if you have considered how that reflects on your own position. I have documentation, Gresham said. He opened the folder. Inside were pages, her pages, the ones torn from the ledger, annotated in red ink with corrections that she could see, even from 3 feet away. He had fabricated. Charlotte, standing near the refreshment table, set her glass down with a click. He has your stolen pages, she said quietly. Maud catalogued the room. 12 buyers now looking at her with doubt. Gresham holding evidence that appeared damning. Her own records, complete and accurate, in the folder at her side. The pieces were all present. The timing was wrong. She needed Hale and Compton. Charlotte had arranged the meeting for the following week. If she presented her evidence now without the partners' support, it was her word against Gresham's, and Gresham had the institutional authority of the auction house behind him. I will address Mr. Gresham's claims through the proper channels, Maud said. In the meantime, any buyer who wishes to examine my independent provenance records is welcome to do so. It was the right answer. It was not enough. She could see the doubt settling into the room like dust, and she could feel, impossibly, Ashworth's anger from across the space. Not see it, feel it. A wave of heat that had nothing to do with the fire in the grate. After the guests departed, Gresham lingered. He stood in the entrance hall with his gloves in his hand, and looked at Maud with the expression of a man who has made a chess move and is waiting for the board to reflect his advantage. You should have stayed dismissed, Miss Sinclair, he said. Your father understood when to accept defeat. It is a pity the instinct did not pass to you. Something behind Maud shifted. Not a sound, a temperature. Ashworth had moved from the far end of the hall to directly behind her, in a span of time that should have required several steps, and had seemed to require none. His hand was at his side, fingers curled, and when Maud glanced at him, his eyes were gold. Not amber, gold. The color of a wolf's eyes in firelight. Gresham did not notice. He was looking at Maud. My father's mistakes are not my inheritance, Maud said, but yours, Mr. Gresham, will be. He left. The door closed behind him. And in the silence that followed, Maud turned to Ashworth and said, Your eyes changed color. The gold faded. Brown returned. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not shame exactly, but the careful blankness of a man who has been caught at something he cannot explain. The light, he said. It was not the light. He said nothing. She catalogued his silence the way she catalogued forged ink, noting the shape of what was absent. That night, alone in the room Ashworth had given her in the East Wing, the heat returned. Stronger this time, deeper, as though her body was remembering something it had only rehearsed before. She opened the window and let the December air pour over her, and she pressed her thumbnail into her finger and recited the Pemberton entries until her voice gave out. At 2 a.m, she heard someone sit down outside her door. No knock, no voice, just the quiet, deliberate sound of a large man settling against a wall, and the warmth, his warmth, seeping through the oak like sunlight through glass. She found a slip of paper that had been pushed beneath the door. 3 words in his handwriting, angular and precise. I know. You are safe. Maud sat on the floor on her side of the door, her back against the wood, felt the heat in her body settle into something that was not comfortable but was no longer frightening. She pressed her hand flat against the door and felt warmth press back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. In the morning, she went to him. He was in the library, standing by the window with his back to the room. When she entered, he turned and his eyes were human and tired and full of something she was only now beginning to recognize. "Tell me," she said. "You would not believe me. I have spent the last 2 weeks believing 6 impossible things about my own body. Try me," he told her. Not all of it. She could feel him editing, choosing. But enough. The wolf, the pack, the alpha, the scent that had led him to her door, the heat that was not a fever but a change, a becoming, something in her blood that had been sleeping and was now awake. She listened. She catalogued. She asked precise questions. How long have you known? And can others smell it? And will it happen again? And with each answer, she pressed her thumbnail into her finger, not from distress, but from the sheer volume of information that needed sorting. "You are a wolf," she said. "Yes. And I am becoming one. It appears so. It is rare in someone your age, but not unprecedented." She looked at him. "That is why you always knew when I was frustrated. You could smell it." "Yes." "That is why the room is warm when you are in it." "Yes." She pressed her thumbnail in, released it. "That is also why you sat outside my door both nights instead of coming in." Something moved in his face. The careful blankness cracking into something raw. The heat makes you vulnerable in ways you do not yet understand. "I would not enter a room where you could not fully choose to have me." She stared at him. Then she said, with the particular dry precision that surfaced only when she was overwhelmed, "That is the most terrifying and considerate thing anyone has ever said to me." His mouth curved, just barely. "I aim for both." Charlotte met Maud at a tea house on Bond Street the following afternoon, took one look at her face, said, "Something has happened that you are not going to tell me, and I am going to pretend not to notice because I have news about Hale." "Tell me." "Hale's wife is worried. She says her husband has been anxious about the Pemberton sale for weeks. He has noticed irregularities, but Gresham has convinced him they are clerical errors. If someone showed Hale the evidence directly, privately, she believes he would act. Can you arrange it?" "I already have. Thursday. Afternoon tea at my house." "Hale is coming for the Garden Society meeting." "Yes, I invented a Garden Society meeting specifically for this purpose." "You are welcome. And you will be there with your records." Maud looked at Charlotte with an affection so fierce it surprised her. "You are the most dangerous woman in London. I am the most dangerous woman with a garden. There is a difference." On Thursday, Maud met Hale. She presented her records quietly, precisely, walking him through each discrepancy with the patience of a cataloger who understood that evidence must be experienced, not merely shown. Hale listened. He asked questions. His face went gray. 43 entries, he said, and 6 phantom items that do not exist. "Good Lord. Mr. Hale, I need you to do one thing. I need you to compare my records against the originals in the auction house archive, if they match, and they will. Gresham's forgeries become undeniable." Hale looked at Charlotte, who handed him a biscuit. "My wife told me to come," he said. "She said I would regret it if I didn't." "Your wife is correct," Charlotte said. Hale agreed to examine the records. Maud left Charlotte's house feeling, for the first time in weeks, that the ground beneath her was solid. It was not. Gresham had been watching. She learned this 2 days later, when a notice appeared in the London Gazette announcing that Maud Sinclair was under investigation for document theft from the auction house, that any party employing her should consider their own liability. The notice was printed. Public. Undeniable. Maud read it in Ashworth's library and felt the words settle into her like stones into water. Her reputation, the fragile, painstakingly rebuilt thing she had constructed from skill and precision and 9 months of careful work, was now publicly questioned. Charlotte arrived within the hour. "I have spoken to Hale. He examined the records yesterday. The forgeries are confirmed, but Gresham has moved faster than we expected." "Can Hale speak publicly?" Charlotte hesitated. "He is afraid." Gresham has reminded him that his own position depends on the auction house's reputation. If the forgeries become public, Hale's career is damaged along with Gresham's. Maud pressed her thumbnail into her finger and felt the familiar crescent of pressure. The plan had partially worked. Hale knew the truth, but Hale would not act. The evidence existed, but had no voice. "I need Compton," she said. "Compton is in Bath." "Then I need someone Compton trusts who is in London." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Compton's sister, Mrs. Eleanor Voss. She manages his correspondence when he is away. She has been to my house twice for actual Garden Society meetings. I can reach her by tomorrow." Ashworth spoke from the doorway. She had not heard him approach. She never heard him approach. But his presence filled the room with warmth and the scent of pine. Compton trusts his sister absolutely. A letter from her, combined with Hale's confirmation of the forgeries, would compel him to act from Bath. Maud looked at him. "You are not going to offer to solve this with your authority. I am offering to stand beside you while you solve it with yours." Charlotte looked between them and said, quietly to no one in particular, "Finally." Over the next 3 days, Maud did not confront Gresham. She did something worse. She turned his world inside out, while he was not looking. Charlotte arranged for Mrs. Voss to receive Maud's complete evidence package. Every altered date, every ink discrepancy, every phantom item, cross-referenced and annotated with the precision of a woman who had been trained to make documents speak. Mrs. Voss read it in a single sitting and sent an express letter to her brother in Bath. Hale, emboldened by the knowledge that Compton would soon be involved, quietly informed 2 senior buyers that the Pemberton provenance should be independently verified. He did not name Gresham. He did not need to. The buyers asked their own questions. Thomas Reed, the junior clerk whose wife had started the chain of information that reached Charlotte, provided Maud with one final piece, the private ledger Gresham kept in his desk, which recorded the proceeds from the phantom items he had already sold. Reed did not steal it. He copied 3 pages during his lunch hour and brought them to Charlotte's house wrapped in a napkin. By the 3rd day, Gresham still did not know. He was preparing for the final Pemberton auction. His letter to the Gazette had done its work. Maud Sinclair was discredited, and the sale would proceed under his authority. He arrived at the auction house on the morning of the sale to find that it would not. Compton had returned from Bath overnight. Hale met him at the door. Mrs. Voss was in the counting room with the evidence laid out on the same desk where Gresham had torn Maud's ledger apart. 2 of the 3 senior buyers had withdrawn their bids pending review. Thomas Reed was at his desk, looking at his hands. Gresham walked into a room full of people he had trusted and found that none of them would meet his eyes. Maud was not there. She did not need to be. The evidence spoke in her voice, precise, methodical, undeniable. Every page she had annotated, every date she had cross-referenced, every ink analysis she had documented sat on the desk, like a wall built one brick at a time by someone who understood that the strongest structures are built from the smallest, most accurate pieces. Compton dismissed him that afternoon, not with shouting or accusation, with a single sentence delivered in front of the entire staff. "Your services are no longer required, Mr. Gresham. The police will contact you regarding the discrepancies." Gresham left the building. He was not destroyed. He was simply alone. Maud learned of Gresham's dismissal from Charlotte, who arrived at Ashworth's townhouse with a bottle of good wine and an expression of deeply satisfied justice. "It is done," Charlotte said. "Compton has issued a formal retraction of the Gazette notice. Hale has submitted a statement confirming your work was accurate. And Mrs. Voss has invited you to tea, which, in her circles, is equivalent to a royal endorsement." Maud sat in the library and felt the tension she had carried for weeks begin to loosen. It did not vanish. It unwound, slowly, like a spring that has been compressed too long and does not quite remember its original shape. Ashworth found her there an hour later. Charlotte had left. The house was quiet. The fire was low, and the room smelled of beeswax and pine, and the particular warmth that meant he was close. He stood in the doorway. She looked up from the desk where her records were still spread, now redundant, now proof of something already proven. "You did not come to the auction house," she said. "It was your victory. I would not have diminished it by being present." "You could not have diminished it." He crossed the room. Not quickly, deliberately, as though giving her time to object. He stopped beside her chair and stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her sleeve. The scent of pine and night air filled her lungs. "Maud," he said. His voice was low, and the wolf was in it, not threatening but present, a warmth beneath the words. "My wolf knew before I did. It knew the moment I caught your scent on a November night. And the man who sat outside your door and did not enter, who watched you work for 2 weeks and said nothing that mattered, he knew too. He was simply afraid of the answer." "What answer?" "Whether you would stay." She stood. They were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, could see the moment his eyes shifted from brown to gold and back again, could hear the low, involuntary sound in his throat that was not quite a voice and not quite a growl, but something older and truer than either. "I cataloged you," she said, "from the first day. The warmth, the eyes, the way you always knew. I have 47 observations in a notebook upstairs, and every single one of them points to the same conclusion." "Which is?" She reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, where the heat was strongest, and felt his heart beat under her hand. Too slow for a human heart. Too steady. Too warm. "That I am staying." He bent his head. She tilted hers. The kiss was brief and warm, and tasted of pine. When they separated, his eyes were gold, and he did not look away, and she did not look away, and the lamp flame bent sideways, and the room held them like a hand holds something precious. Charlotte's voice came from the hallway. "I forgot my gloves. I'm not coming in. I'm leaving now." "You are welcome." The front door closed. Maud laughed. The kind of laugh that surprises the person making it, as though she had forgotten she was allowed to. 6 weeks later, Maud sat in the small office Ashworth had given her on the ground floor of the townhouse. Her own space with her own desk, and shelves she had organized herself, and catalogued the spring acquisition for a private collector in Kent. The room smelled of ink and binding glue, and the jasmine that had begun to bloom in the garden outside her window. She could smell it with the sharpness that had not faded since November, but had become, over the weeks, something she understood. She was changing. Slowly, in her own time. In a house where the Alpha King of London sat in the room above her and could hear her pen scratching and chose not to interrupt. He came downstairs at 4 o'clock, as he did every afternoon, carrying 2 cups of tea. He set one on her desk without looking at her work. He never looked at her work unless she invited him to, and sat in the chair by the window with his own cup and a stack of correspondence. "You brought the Assam," she said, smelling it before she tasted it. "You had that line between your eyebrows. The Assam is for concentration. You cannot smell concentration. I can smell the ink you use when you are writing fast, which you only do when you are concentrating." The Assam was an inference. She looked at him. He looked back. His eyes were brown in the afternoon light, steady and warm, and the wolf behind them was at rest. She could see it now, the way she could see the shadow of a large, contented animal lying behind his human stillness. He was calm. He was home. The garden outside was beginning to turn green. In the hallway, she could hear the housekeeper arranging flowers, and somewhere upstairs a clock chimed the quarter hour. Charlotte was due at 5, with news from Mrs. Voss about a new cataloguing commission. The British Museum, no less, wanted Maud to assess a collection of Tudor silverware. Charlotte had delivered this information by letter the previous day with a postscript that read, "I told you, you are not invisible. You are merely stubborn." Maud pressed her thumbnail into her finger, not from pressure, but from habit, the way a musician touches an instrument when not playing. The crescent mark was familiar, friendly, a small signature of the self she had been before all of this and the self she was becoming. Ashworth watched her from the window chair. His tea cooled in his hands. The light caught the gold in his eyes. Just a flicker. Just